I believe that as we mature and as we also reach the limits of our national capability, each of these countries will turn to the other. And I wish we would have a sort of umbrella identity where we all can be proud of the fact that we're part of Asia.
There's much that we should be proud of in Asia, but you will have a situation where rising Asia will have to deal with a number of challenges.
But I think Asia is going to overcome those as being the most competitive, most fast-moving trade and industrial bloc that there is, with one very important asset, and that's where the largest number of the people on this planet live. Asia is where humanity lies, a great part of humanity.
In such a complex, interrelated world, it is absolutely critical that we provide a platform for the young to be able to develop a new type of leadership.
The Institute looks at wanting to create knowledge in the idea of societal leadership. What makes societal leaders the way they are? How do they make decisions? What are the commonalities among all of them? How do we meet the pressing needs of society?
As a university, we have an important role to fulfill in educating for the leaders and the change agents of tomorrow. When we bring people together at the university from different parts of the world, that's the moment where we can teach them about what it is to work in a cultural, diverse group.
Because the Institute bridges both the areas of research and university communities, I think it actually has a very unique position. And with that starting point, I think the idea grew and a lot of people felt that this was a worthy cause. It is not purely a leadership training institute. It does conduct research, but it has responsibilities beyond that also. And I think that's the challenge and the excitement for everybody in ISL.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the inaugural Institute for Societal Leadership Summit. I'm Sabrina Chua. Now, we're very delighted to have you join us for the next 1.5 days to explore how we can do good better. This summit is about gathering societal leaders looking to do good and making a difference in Southeast Asia. That's you here in the audience, and engaging you in discussions so that you can raise critical questions and hopefully generate fresh perspectives on how to better address the issues facing our society today. Now, we at ISL hope that this will be an annual platform where such conversations can lead to greater commitment and collaboration to meet our region's most pressing societal needs. Now, just as we're hoping to have some fruitful discussions and sharing here at SMU, we'd also like for the discussions to continue online. So we'll be live tweeting the key points from these 1.5 days. And if you'd like to share some key takeaways from the summit, please hashtag ISLSMU in your posts. And now I'd like to welcome Martin Tan, Executive Director of the Institute for Societal Leadership, to tell you a little bit more about what we do at ISL.
Mr. Ho Kong Peng, Chairman, Singapore Management University, Professor Arnold Di Meyer, President, SMU, Your Excellencies, speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm so used to work with a youth crowd, so the kind of energy we have, about 30 ASEAN students here with us, so I'm going to try that again. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural Societal Leadership Summit. And we put the inaugural so that it tells ourselves this is the first time and it's going to be going on for a while. And we welcome you back to the Societal Leadership Summit for 2016, right as we first start, okay? You can probably tell from many of the staff's faces that we are pretty excited that this is happening. Not because of the fact that shortly after this is all our holiday, which we are looking forward after 2 years of very hard work, but rather today marks a very key milestone for the journey for the Institute for Societal Leadership. I would like to take this moment, and you saw from the video that we're very proud to have Mr. Ratan Tata as our chairman of the advisory board. He was due to come, and he sends his apologies and his regrets. There's some health issues that he is wanting to take care of, so travel wasn't on the radar for a while. So he sends his regrets and his apologies. But what started purely as an idea for us to invest in a new term called societal leadership has led us over 2 years. This past 2 years to travel to many of your countries, to 11 Southeast Asian countries, to understand from those doing good on the ground and what pressing challenges we face as a region. What innovative solutions they have been embarking on, and more importantly, what questions are not yet asked but needed to be asked. It's been 2 years since we first started, and I remember very well the first board meeting, and many of our board members are present in that very first board meeting. I remember that we presented to them a bold plan to take the region by storm. We had ideas to run large-scale conferences, large-scale youth conferences, and to invite people from all over the region to participate. I remember being very proud of what we had put together in the board meeting. But I also remembered their advice. And their advice was this: start small, listen to the ground, understand the needs, and take time to build. In our fast-paced world of key performance indicators and quarterly reporting, it was to many of us a breath of fresh air. It gave us the confidence that we are in this for the long haul because serving the region is an important work for us. So we did just that. While Asia remains our focus, we decided to start with Southeast Asia, and many of you are present here are from this region. We have conducted country insight labs in all 11 Southeast Asian countries, meeting over 260 societal leaders from across the sectors: government, academia, media, civil society, and business sectors, just to understand the region. And I'm very excited that later on, Dr. Lim Lai Cheng, our academic director, will be sharing some of our insights from this research in terms of what we have collated from these leaders in the region, and also introduce the Country Insight Labs monograph. We've conducted interviews with elder statesmen, senior business civil society leaders, and business and civil society leaders to collect their leadership insights and oral history through our Digital Narratives of Asia initiative, so that we can learn from them what worked in the past and perhaps apply them in the present. We've met many society leaders who are doing tremendous work in the region for the people, and many of them have become speakers here today. And some of their work, very few know about. So we've started Catalyst Asia, a magazine that goes out to the region to share the good that people are doing, sharing perspectives and opinions on issues facing us in this region. And in your participants' bag is our latest copy and our latest issue of Catalyst Asia. And I'm also very happy to share that our website, containing over 90 articles now, goes live today, and you can visit it at catalystasiastories.com. And I trust that you will visit during tea break. Now, instead of running major youth programs, what we have started to do was to work with just 44 high school students in our Blue Skill program last year, and just 25 undergraduates for our Seagull program, which is a Southeast Asian global undergraduate program. With a small group, we were able to go deep in many of our conversations, talking about key issues in this region and how, as a network of young leaders, they can create collaborative opportunities among themselves made possible by technology. And in the same vision of building networks of leaders, we launched our Service for Asia Fellowship with 4 young working professionals who have decided to take 18 months of their life and a pause in their careers to serve this region. They are deployed in the fellowship to another Southeast Asian country not of their own to immerse themselves in issues and get hands-on experiences in the solutions. They will go back to their corporate lives with far greater understanding of the needs on the ground, with a class of fellows they can count on to do something significant together. And I could go on and on in terms of things that we are trying to build and something to learn. So we thought we'd put together a video to show you how all the various programs that ISL is wanting to do comes together. Please have a look at the screen. I hope you enjoyed that. At the end, all the efforts that we put in is to help others do good better. It's not just about doing good well, which is important, but just that little bit. What can we do as an institute in little bits, one step at a time, to help each and every one of us do good better? In these 2 years leading up to today, we've met incredible people. We've made incredible friends. Learn about the impactful work their organizations are doing, regardless of the sectors they come from. But we have also learned that the issues are often no better than they were before, because fundamentally, many of these issues, what we call wicked problems, are complex and problems that cannot be solved by one single sector alone. We've learned that while there are many answers and solutions being explored today, there are also questions that remain to be asked. One of such questions that we will explore this day and a half is, what is societal leadership? How does that matter to us? And is that the approach moving forward? In all honesty, we don't know yet. And with my bosses here, it's a bit hard to say we don't know yet. But it is a good starting point. We don't pretend to have all the answers. But at ISL, our working definition for societal leadership is the practice of creating sustainable value and impact for the betterment of society within one's largest sphere of influence. We believe that regardless of where we are, what stage of life we are in, we can create value and impact for the community around us in a sustainable manner. How will societal leadership look like being lived out in our region? What does it mean to be a societal leader? All these are questions we are continuously asking, because if we can find the answer, society is far better off. We started conversations, and with your partnership and contribution, I believe wholeheartedly we can find the answers. This summit is as much an exploration as a milestone for us. It marks the first time we're bringing societal leaders from across the region and sectors together. With current and emerging leaders from 19 countries represented here today, there is much we can do together. A good friend and New Zealand author, Dr. Markstrom, said, communication is the sharing of created meaning. Conversation is about the creating of shared meaning. We've designed the sessions as conversations. We have presentations, but we ask you as participants to have conversations with us, with the panelists, with the speakers. We hope with this approach, we will have greater conversation over the next 2 days about the many issues that matters to us. It is our dream that the summit will not just be a collection of ideas, but the collective creation of new ones. That will be creating a shared meaning for the common good for all in this region. Have a great summit ahead. I hope we will make your time both impactful and meaningful. Thank you very much. And this is one opportunity and privilege, so it brings me great pleasure now to invite on stage someone who many would agree to be amongst those we look up to as a societal leader, someone who has created great sustainable impact for the betterment of society in the spheres of influence he has had. Ladies and gentlemen, would you now please put your hands together to welcome on stage the chairman for Singapore Management University, Mr. Ho Kwong Peng, to deliver his opening address. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. Martin knows very well that when he has to admit that he doesn't have the answers, and he's sitting in front of his bosses, he has to go and say nice things about his bosses. So afterwards, when you moderate the session with Arnold and I, just be sure that you give the difficult questions to Nolene and you don't embarrass us, Martin. Thank you. Your Excellencies, other speakers and advisory board members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all the young people here participating in this summit today, it is indeed my pleasure to open the inaugural Society Leadership Summit 2015. And a warm welcome to all of you, especially those who have traveled from quite far away to SMU for this event. Looking around this auditorium, I think we see many friends with us here today, including the ambassadors from Brazil, Brunei, and the Philippines. And it's definitely an honor, considering the amount of years that each of them have put in as societal leaderships, leaders in their own field, for us to have you with us. I also want to take this opportunity to recognize some of the advisory board members of ISL who have traveled to Singapore just to support this summit and for our own advisory board meeting tomorrow. We have, for example, Kun Asa Sarasin, former Foreign Minister and Principal Private Secretary to the King of Thailand. We have Pak Arifin Siregar, former governor, Bank of Indonesia, Mr. Gita Wirawan, former Minister of Trade of Indonesia, Dr. Nolene Hazer, former Undersecretary General of the United Nations, who will also be with us on the panel later on and who will field all the difficult questions. I could go on the list here. We've got Ivy, Sanjeev, Shankar, and of course Mr. Ratan Tata, who unfortunately could not be with us today here. But without wanting to sound like a directory and a roll call, I want to thank all of you for making time for this inaugural summit. One of the board members I'd like to mention in particular is Ms. Janet Lim, a Singaporean who recently retired as the Assistant UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. She spent many years tackling the complex global problem of saving the lives of refugees, an issue that continues to be very real for all of us in the world, whether it be in Europe or even in Asia. I encourage you to read an article that she's written entitled, quote, "A World in Crisis, Conflicts, Refugees, and Humanitarian Response," unquote, which she contributed to Catalyst Asia, the magazine of ISL, which Martin referred to earlier, and which I think will be made available at the tea break. Janet has also been recently appointed Fellow of the School of Social Sciences here at SMU. So welcome, Janet, to the SMU community. I think all of us can appreciate the complexities of societal issues today. And unlike mechanical problems, societal issues are living and breathing, and as such require new ways of solution seeking. Ideas are always enough, but it is in execution that is problematic. And whether it's a problem of refugees in Europe or in Asia, the continuous threat of terrorism and the underlying societal reasons for this to manifest itself, or the environment in Southeast Asia, such as the haze, there's a deep need to understand the depth of the problem, to understand that it is a whole of society issue, and therefore, being such a broad issue, it really truly requires more participants from civil society to resolve these issues as a whole of society problem. The rise of social enterprises as another cluster outside of traditional government, NGOs, and communities of volunteers is a fascinating development in the last decade or so. And while we want to contribute to this and we want to see more people participate in NGOs and civil society, there are also very complex issues associated with this. As social enterprises proliferate, more people who are perhaps not that dedicated to social welfare and want to take the platform of social enterprises for their own private, perhaps even selfish purposes, are also coming onto the scene. And that's another broad issue to have to deliberate. We should be happy on one hand on the rise of civil society. We should also be careful about how civil society is not exploited by people for their own specific individual purposes. The region is very complex, and with multiple religions, cultures, and governments, each society operates with its own historical and geographic peculiarities. And while peace has largely been the operating environment for all of us in Asia, the possibilities for tension and conflicts continue to exist. And it highlights the need for this region to converge while it continues to diverge. And this provides us with a very rich canvas for research, understanding, outreach to different communities, and particularly to the young. The inaugural Societal Leadership Summit is our first attempt to bring the region closer, to have a better understanding of the challenges we all face. Through such open platforms, we believe that good conversations will lead to sharper minds, better answers, and new collaborations. This is a summit to deepen our knowledge and efforts, and challenging one another is as important as forging new relationships for today and tomorrow. The Institute for Societal Leadership is committed to not only organizing the summit and the various programs for the region, but also for researching on the concept of societal leadership. The Institute intends to provide very strong research and development on the impact of leadership, and very often, of course, on the paucity and the lack of it, and the region's future in relationship to all these whole of society issues. Finding the intersection between academic rigor and real-world insights will require deep analysis around the value of collaboration across sectors, the role of social enterprises versus NGOs, and the skills needed for future societal leaders to resolve such complex issues. The ISL is a representation of SMU's commitment to deepening content, which are, of course, the social issues, and broadening context, which is, of course, the region as our neighborhood. And as we establish SMU as a different you, we also want to be a more relevant you. So the ISL plays a key role in realizing SMU's Vision 2025 of being a game changer, a catalyst, and a global example by the work the Institute does in the region. By investing in new knowledge, forging new partnerships, and creating platforms such as this summit, the Institute intends for greater collaboration and conversations to take place around issues which matter to all of us. So it is now my pleasure to declare the Societal Leadership Summit 2015 open and to welcome you all to have an engaged, and very fruitful conversation ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask you to please take a seat on stage as we proceed with the first keynote panel, The Need for Societal Leadership. Could I also invite moderator Martin Tan, as well as SMU President Arno de Meyer and ISL board member Nolene Hazer to please take the stage for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is one of the this is one of the hardest things I have to do. I have two of my bosses on stage with me, and one of my board members. So I'm going to have a hard time trying to manage this right now. As we have said earlier, that it is all about conversations. The format that we're going to do this panel is we're going to ask each of them to share their thoughts on the idea and the topic, which is the need for societal leadership. And then we're going to open up to a round of conversations. There will be microphones with our guys coming to you. So please feel free later on to raise your hands. We only ask you to introduce yourself, where you come from, and the question that you might have. So a very quick round of introduction. We have on my far right, Professor Arno de Meyer, President of SMU. Of course, Dr. Nolene Hazel, former Undersecretary for the United Nations, as well as you have met Mr. Ho Kwang Peng, Chairman of SMU. The idea of societal leadership, and I've shared earlier before, is a new term that we're trying to build. As we started ISL, we went to Google, and these days, in an academic setting, not the best way to do research, but one of our landscape study, if you will, was to key in societal leadership, and there were very, very little references. After a year of work in the area, when we key in societal leadership again, in the top 10 list were some of the things that we were doing. And then we found ourselves that it is an area that not many people have built in. We understand the term corporate social responsibility. We understand the term being sustainable. We understand the term being socially responsible. But how does it all come together? What role does leaders play in society, and what does it mean to create new ideas and new thoughts being a societal leader, as well as exercising societal leadership? Is it purely a person, or is it organizations exercising leadership in society? Those are some of the questions that we're going to be embarking on. And as I've shared for the format, I'm going to be inviting Professor de Meyer to start off with your thoughts on the need for societal leadership.
Thank you very much, Martin. And from my side also, a very warm welcome to SMU, to all of you. And particularly happy to see so many students on the side over sitting there. Because you are the ones who will be the leaders for tomorrow, right? We can talk about it, you will have to do it. In my introductions, I want to sort of focus on three ideas. That is, first of all, the idea of collective responsibility for society. Secondly, on what I call collaborative leadership. And thirdly, on resilience. Let me first address a few thoughts or give a few thoughts around collective responsibility. And I'll start with a personal experience. Some of you may know that before I joined in 2010, this university as president, I was the dean at the business school at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And one of the biggest surprises I had when I came here was that this interaction between government, business, and civil society, as I was used to in the United Kingdom and in Europe, was far less well developed here. I'll give you one example of that. The chairman of my advisory board at the business school was at that moment Lord John Brown, who was the former CEO of BP. And he was one of the people who really pushed the concept of beyond petroleum, of saying, of sustainability, responsibility for sustainability, also for companies that are actually in natural resources. He was one of the advisors of the former Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, Tony Blair, when Tony Blair decided that by 2020 or by 2030, he set an almost impossible standard of carbon reduction for the United Kingdom. The advice to go that far actually came from Lord John Brown, who actually was running one of those companies that was producing all that carbon for the world. What struck me or what is important in that example is that actually business took responsibility for pushing society in a new direction. When I came here to Southeast Asia, and I can't say that I came in 2010, I had been many times here before. My first time in Singapore was in 1984, far beyond or far before many of you were born here in this room. But when I came here in 2010, I was struck by the fact that in many societal problems, or for many societal problems, the whole of society looked at government. Looked at government about, tell us what to do. And once we know, and I'll take again the example of sustainability, once I know what the norms are I have to live up to, what the standards are, what the regulation is, I will apply it. I will do it. But tell me what to do. As opposed to, I'll take the initiative to push the government, push civil society to go in a particular direction, to work together, to take that collective responsibility. Actually, Lord John Brown has written an excellent book that was published 2 months ago under the title Connect, how business that engage with society become more successful. And the whole book is about precisely the collaboration between business, government, and the civil society to push the whole of society in a better direction. A second point about collective responsibility is that, again, I'm going back to some of the research that was done at Cambridge when I was the dean of the business school there, when some of my colleagues wrote a book about what they call corporate citizenship against corporate social responsibility. And the argument in that book is corporate social responsibility is a misnomer. It means that companies are going to spend some money on doing good. What Martin pointed out is that societal leadership is about doing good better. And I think the essence of that thinking that was reflected in that book, based on a lot of empirical material, was that actually companies are better not when they do corporate social responsibility, but actually when they become true corporate citizens. In other words, take up their role as a citizen in society. And they illustrated it by the fact that they looked at success of corporate social responsibility activities, and they came to the conclusion that the companies that were most successful were actually doing things with society that were very close to the core activity of what they were all about. In other words, if you were a company that was involved, let's say, in real estate, that your success in corporate social responsibility, as it was then named, was much higher if you did something around real estate with people, perhaps real estate for poor people, etc. Not when we just engage in corporate social responsibility as such. I don't want to go into the details of, I can come back to it, but the point I really want to make is that corporations, according to this, the hypothesis and this, I should say the assertion of these researchers, was all about the corporation should take citizenship role. They are citizens. There are different types of citizens, but they are citizens. Again, next to individual citizens, civil society, and of course, together working with the government. That means that I strongly believe in the fact that we need to create an environment in which we learn, we study, we research how these three groups in society work together to push society in a different direction, to work, to help the society move in a different direction. And when I came here after a few months and years, you start thinking about what can you do as a president. And I must say that very quietly, without making this a big, big announcement, I have said that at least in this area, we as SMU want to be, as our chairman already said, a different U, but also a university with big impact. As a consequence, we have this Institute for Societal Leadership, but we also have our Masters in Tri-Sector Collaboration, and we have quite a lot of work that is happening in the Lean Center of this university that is complementary to what the Institute for Societal Leadership is doing. One thing that I want to add around that, that idea of collective responsibility that we have for society is the idea that this is much more than PPP. This is much more than public-private partnerships. This is about taking together responsibility for where the society is going. My second idea, I know that I probably speak too long, but my second idea is that of collaborative leadership. Working together between business, government, and society and civil society will require a different type of leadership than most of us are used to. One of my former colleagues at INSEAD, Manfred Ketz de Vries, who is a well-known world specialist on leadership, once told me that he had made an inventory of the number of leadership theories that exist. And he came to 298. This is not a joke. He had the list, actually. He showed it to me. Because there is a lot of, let's face it, there's a lot of snake oil in leadership. There's a lot of talk. There are lots of fly-by-night consultants. There's a lot of, it's an easy subject because we all need it, but it's sort of a little bit unclear what it really is all about. I'm not saying that I want to add a 299th theory of leadership, but having gone through the leadership literature and going back perhaps to some of the very early gurus on management, Mary Follett Parker, who was a sociologist, who's not actually a management expert, and anthropologist actually, but she basically said management, and she probably was talking about leadership, but in the 1920s that differentiation wasn't that clear. Management is about getting things done through a community of people, not by commanding a community of people what to do, by telling them what to do, but getting things done through working together with them. And I think that when we come to societal leadership is probably an important component of it. What I've called very often collaborative leadership. Working together, not providing leadership by telling people what to do, but leadership by working together with each other, by collaborating. Three other words that I would say is it's about listening to each other. And listening is very difficult. Listening very often becomes procrastination, not doing anything. But listening is trying to understand what the other parties really have to say. And our Dean of the School of Social Sciences, Professor James Tang, who is sitting there in the third row, knows very well that when I talk about the Masters of Tri-Sector Collaboration, that one of the biggest discoveries we made in that program is that how difficult it is to talk to each other. Actually, how difficult it is to understand what the others are saying. And so the listening component of collaborative leadership is very important without falling into procrastination. Evidence-based influencing is important in collaborative leadership. Influencing people, not manipulating them, but influencing people. Not telling them what to do, not by leadership by command, but by trying to convince people, by influencing them. And thirdly, as element of that collaborative leadership is probably a very, very high level of adaptation, an ability to adapt constantly to new situations. Because when one works on societal problems, the world is never the same. Being a Belgian, I can tell you that I've experienced that over the last few weeks. Most of you would have thought 2 months ago of Belgium as a place where it was nice to be living, quiet, nothing happens there. That's the reason why leaders go to Brussels to talk to each other. And suddenly we have become the most prosperous failed state, as it was described in the New York Times yesterday. The world changes constantly around you. What we see today after the problems that France has gone through, but that probably other countries will go through in the future, this is a different world than it was a year ago, than it was 2 years ago, than it was 3 years ago. Change is with us forever. That is, change is a certainty. Uncertainty is a certainty, I would say. So we will have to cope in societal leadership with uncertainty, which means that many of us have to develop a lot more, and that's my third point that I want to make. Societal leadership requires a lot more resilience, ability to survive difficult circumstances. And that is something that can be taught. And that's my last thought that the last comment that I want to make here before I hand it over back to Martin, is that we as universities probably have a responsibility in teaching people how to become more resilient in an uncertain world, in a world of what is now called by consultants a VUCA world, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. In that VUCA world, we will need a lot more resilience, and that resilience will be even more required for people who actually exert societal leadership. With these three thoughts, collective responsibility, collaborative leadership, and resilience, I leave it to Martin.
Thank you very much, Arno. So on collaborative leadership, just know that Snake Oil 299 is available after this break, okay? So I'm going to pass the time now to Dr. Nolene Hazel.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and a very good morning, everyone. Well, the title of this panel is The Need for Societal Leadership. So let me look at the need first. Why do we need societal leadership? Very simple. What is the world that is not what it should be. Had we listened to Arnold talking about volatility and uncertainty, and I would add that not only do we live in an uncertain world, but we also live in a divided world. And what is absolutely critical is to be able to understand that in our world today, there are still many persistent problems that have not been addressed. Problems of poverty, problems of growing inequality together with the generation of wealth. But at the same time, there are new challenges. Challenges of sustainability, of climate change, of weather patterns. And I don't have to talk about it here. You just experienced the haze, and it's got terrible because of the changing weather patterns and the dry seasons. But at the same time, there are also growing threats. Growing threats, we've seen people on the move, we've seen displacement at its worst, we've seen trafficking, we've seen the rise of extremisms that we don't quite understand. So there are many things that have challenged us and that force us to think out of the box. And in a sense, we cannot behave and make decisions, and this is why the societal part is critical. We need to understand society in new ways. We have been so well trained in our educational system to think in terms of sectors. We are an economist. I'm a sociologist. We are a doctor or whatever. And we function in our sectors as though they are not related. And yet, in order to solve some of these extremely complex problems, we have to have an integrated approach and an integrated thinking. Wang Pen talks about the whole of society approach. But at the same time, I think what we actually need is to be able to think in a more holistic way, in a more integrated way. But we also need to bring different players together. We cannot just rely on government, no matter how accountable some of our governments are. Most are not. That's why we have failed states. Unfortunately. No, I'm not referring to Belgium. But even when we have accountable governments, we cannot just rely on governments alone. We heard Arnold talk about the business sector. Well, I'm sorry to say that corporate social responsibility alone is not enough. We need to think of how business is done at its core. How do we generate wealth? How do we actually make sure that in our world today, we have smart economies and smart businesses that takes into account the ESG, In other words, what is important in the environment, in our ecosystems? How does that relate to society in terms of many of the societal problems? How do we generate not just prosperity, but shared prosperity to deal with growing inequalities and grievances so that this idea of social injustice doesn't take roots? How do we make sure that there is governance and accountability? And what drives that? So these are very critical issues. We can't just rely just on civil society, however determined they are. We all want to be able to do well in order to, and in doing well to also do a lot of good for many of our societies. But at the same time, that's not enough. So what does this leadership look like? The new leadership that I am thinking about that we need in the world today is what I call an alliance of the conscience. In other words, an awakening of a new consciousness and an alliance that is built around that. Arnold talks about the PPP. It's not just enough. It's not just public-private partnership. It has to be public-private people's partnership. You have to be able to generate and to connect with the ground. Many of us, we come from a place where we make policies, but sometimes it's actually disengaged from what is actually happening on the grounds, and solutions that are on the ground are not actually taken advantage of. So how do you make sure that you are linked to the grounded reality of people's lives? And how do you make sure that people are empowered to be part of the solution? So the new alliance, I would talk about a new alliance, but an alliance that is actually built on 4 Ps. And it's not public-private people's partnership. It's about principles. Where are the ethics and the values that align us together? And this is important because it is important to bring the governments, the people, the private sector along a core set of values and along accountable or mutual accountability. And this is what governance or the new types of governance is actually about. The new leadership that I think about is somebody who can mobilize, is actually groups of people who can mobilize that. So one is principle, but the other one is people. How do we mobilize people in such a way that we generate new energy, new idealism, new talents, release the potential of what we have? And then, of course, the other P is really understanding that our planet is fragile and that we need to be able to take care of our planet. So people, planet, principles, and also, at the end of the day, if we want to generate prosperity, how do we generate prosperity in a way that takes care of people as well as of our planet? So this is about practice. How do we practice? I also would like to say that it's how do we practice leadership, right? There are problems, and problems in the world, in our societies. So it's not just leadership that is out there, it's actually generating and mobilizing leadership around a particular problem. How do we unite over a particular problem in order to generate solutions? And I can give examples. So if, say, for example, we're talking about the haze, that is a problem. Who needs to come to the table? So many different players to come with a different, to find the right solution. You need the governments. You're not just at the national level. You need the governments at the local level. You need your businesses. You need the small farmers. You need the consumers. You need a whole set of people. You need your scientists. So can we actually come together to have that type of a platform in order to fully understand what the problems are from different perspectives? And this is where research would be important. But at the same time, the idea of listening to each other in order to have a much deeper insight of where different people face different problems or different stakeholders see a problem differently, in order to generate a solution that we are all committed to. And this is what I call mutual accountability. Well, yesterday, I give you another example, and of course you will not be surprised because I was also the executive director of the United Nations Development Fund for Women. Yesterday was the International Day to End Violence Against Women. That was formed at the General Assembly in 17th of December 1999, after I actually was asked by Bella Abzug, some of you may know her, she dared me whether would you dare to break into the General Assembly, and of course I did, on International Women's Day, with a group of people from the ground, and with fantastic players like Nelson Mandela, like at that time the head of the World Bank with Kofi Annan and so on, and with tremendously glamorous people like Glenn Close, Julie Andrews, and the whole lot. And the whole thing was actually to end violence in women's lives. And yesterday was the International Day to End Violence in Women's Lives. It was an international day. But at the same time, it is 16 days of activism on the 25th of November till the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. And this is absolutely critical because as we are talking, violence against women and the closing of spaces in women's lives have actually increased because of the rise of extremisms. And you just have to think of what has happened with the closing down of spaces for women to just get an education. Right? Malala is a very good example, but so are the kidnapping of the girls by Boko Haram and so on. So in other words, there are threats. When we actually make gains, it's not once and for all. It's not a linear direction. Gains made can be lost. And unless we are watchful, and unless we maintain these spaces, these gains can be captured by other players, right? And I think we need to be very aware of that because, as I said, we live in a divided world. But at the same time, there are also shocks, be it the financial shocks, the man-made shocks of the haze, or the climate change shocks of natural disasters. So how do we actually build resilience to manage some of this? So when I think of what is first of all, I'm very sure by now you know that we have a need for societal leadership, but where do we want to go? So if the world is not if the world that is not what it should be, where is it we want to go? And in the United Nations, we have just come up with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And what we have been asking for a very long time is our future, the type of future that we want. One that is more inclusive, one that is, how do we build more a society that is more inclusive of the type of diversity, one that is more sustainable, one that is more resilient, one that is more vibrant, that takes into account the creativity of the human soul and the human spirit, and one that we will be very proud to give to our children and to our grandchildren. So that, in fact, is what societal leadership is all about.
That's great, Nolene. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Nolene. I love the idea about being empowered to participate so that everybody can be involved. We're going to pass the time to KP.
Yeah, I think because we don't have much time left and we really want to get involvement from everyone else. And I think both Nolene and Arnold have said most things already. I think the only point I would like to focus on is actually something that you had said earlier, Martin, and that's, in a way, what's in a name? I think everything is in a name. Yeah. And I'd like to go back to the origins of us founding ISL. We don't want to start another institute for its own sake. There are already 298 definitions of leadership. There are already 300 over institutes probably in Asia devoted to this type of topic. And I think for many of the young people here, it's important for you to know the difference. When we chose the name societal leadership, it's actually very different than social leadership. As others have spoken about already, there are lots of institutes and research centers and leadership institutes devoted to political leadership, There are studies on economic issues. There are particularly also studies on social issues. But that word, as you said, as you Googled earlier on, was a few years ago hardly ever used and now is really quite prevalent. And what is a societal issue? It's truly a whole of society issue. It's an issue or problem which cannot be resolved purely by economics or by social welfare, social work, or by political leadership. And we felt that there was a crying need for such an institute, not only in Singapore, but in all of Asia, for us to focus on a number of the issues that have been touched upon. And I'd just like to highlight a few of them and for us to all recognize how these are burning issues which neither political nor social nor economic insights alone by professionals in their respective silos can ever resolve. We've already talked about the haze. The haze is an issue which requires political leadership. It involves companies. It involves changing the behavior patterns of people on the ground, the farmers themselves, whose livelihoods are at stake. It is totally a societal issue. Human migration, not just in terms of refugees or the Rohingyas from Burma or what's happening in Europe, not just refugees, but migration issues of illegal immigrants and so on. Again, the whole big story of the 21st century is going to be massive migration of people around the world. That is not a purely economic, social, or political issue. It requires a whole of society kind of response. Even issues, as we've discussed earlier with you, Nolene, about the roots of terrorism. It's very much seen as a security issue. But we all know the roots of terrorism lie in far deeper societal problems. And finally, even issues such as demographics, aging, together with falling fertility rates. Governments around the world and in Asia have tried to mitigate these problems, but they're not going to be problems that can be resolved by any one particular sector dealing with it. So the need for an institute of societal leadership to study societal issues, on one hand with research, on the other hand to try to execute leadership with young people around the region, there is really a crying need for this. And I think with this inaugural summit, we can perhaps tackle these issues and focus on them really on a societal basis. And I think it was good of you to point out that everything really is in the name, and it's very important for us to recognize that. So perhaps so that we can open up to everyone else.
Thank you very much. And in all our travels, we have found that a lot of these issues are not just in particular countries, but across the region as well. So, like we said earlier, this is designed as really a conversation. So we're looking for anyone with questions. We're looking for the first 4 questions for Nolene. No, I'm just kidding. So there we go. We have one over here, just a microphone as well, and then followed by Jason, right? Okay.
Good morning. Thanks to Dr. Nolene for such a passionate talk. My name is Francis. I'm from SIM. I just want to ask, just now you pointed out a number of those international days, right? Days where you celebrate to fight violence against women, human rights days. I think many of us have no idea that there are such designated days, you see. I think one problem with leaders is the problem of communication with the public. So I believe that, I mean, as a former journalist myself, I believe that many of us are either misinformed or uninformed about all these societal issues. So if leaders cannot tell us what's going on, how are we going to continue to respond in a responsible way to such challenges? So what are your takes about communication? Because I haven't heard anybody talking about how we communicate. Because in this world right now, there's a fight for ideological space, right? Basically, it's because of ideology that refugees, people had to run away from their homes because of some strong ideological conflicts in homelands. So I just want to ask about communication problems for leaders.
Communication by leaders.
I think communication is absolutely key, because how you communicate will also generate your narrative, how you understand society and so on. But I would not just say that it should just come from the leaders. It should not just be top-down. I think, especially now, we have the social media, we have the ability to connect, and there are so many ways of actually finding out what is actually happening. And I think this is an age whereby we are communicating, but sometimes I feel we're not deep enough, because we are so used to Facebook and Twitter and so on, so that we send single sentences rather than a much deeper understanding of what is actually happening. Because at the end of the day, what we need to do is communication that can bridge divides, right? And communication that actually can bring people together, and we mobilize through communication, and advocacy is actually at the end of the day good communication. And if we are going to have the type of leadership that I spoke about, there's the building of the alliance, of the conscience, of a new awakening that can only come through very good communication.
And really also what Anna was talking about in terms of collaborative leadership, and communication is a very big part of it.
Yeah. I just want to repeat maybe something that I said before, but communication is not only about talking, but it's about listening. Listening so that you know what people are interested in and how you can react to it. I happen to know, because I watched TV yesterday evening, that there was this day for, or against violence
Against women,
committed to women. And it sort of passed me. I looked at it, I noticed it, I registered it. That's probably the word. I didn't feel any passion about it. Perhaps because it was not communicated in the way that I feel immediately involved with. And that searching for that involvement, understanding how we can create that involvement, requires a lot of listening. And I do think that political leaders need both to communicate very clearly, I have no problems with that, but also need to listen very carefully and listen to the unspoken messages.
Storytelling is going to be more and more a key part of what leaders have to do very soon. Jie, you had a question, right? Yeah. And then we'll come this side very quickly.
Hi, I'm Jie Chen, and I work pretty closely with youth in getting them to work from a place of possibility and creating the world that they want to live in and the world that they are proud, that they would be proud to leave for their children and grandchildren. And so my question is, what is the role of youth in societal leadership, and not just at SMU? Because I mean, not everyone gets the chance to attend SMU. So I mean, whether it's out of SMU in Singapore or in the region, how do we get more youth involved in societal leadership and not letting it just be a conversation of privilege and only those who have access to it can actually participate in it?
Cool. Arno, you want to?
I basically should leave that answer to Martin and let him tell what the experiences were. No, I'm serious. It's not trying to get rid of it, but in the spirit of what our chairman and myself and others in the board want to do with the Institute of Societal Leadership, it is really reaching out to the region and to the young people in the region and ensure that they have the opportunities to work together with each other, to learn from each other, and build actually the future cadre of leaders for this region. Future cadre of leaders that actually will take societal responsibility. We translate at different levels, and I'm now going to repeat something that Martin said in the introduction, but we look at pre-university youth and see how we can bring them together and let them work together on societal problems. We look at sort of what the core business of SMU is all about, the undergraduate students, and I look at that level and work with quite a few universities in the region, in Ateneo in the Philippines, in Manila, UPM, other universities. We try to work with them and to create a network so that we actually can work together, and hopefully that then some of that work will trickle down in these different universities. Again, it's a very hands-on, working, some education, working together on an internet platform over the year, coming back together to work together and come up with solutions. But the whole point is really about giving them the opportunity to get to know each other. I come back to the same word, listen to each other, learn from each other, and actually create that cadre of leaders for Southeast Asia of tomorrow. And the third leg of that is, of course, what Martin called the Service for Asia scholarships, which is really about post-university, I would say, young and high potentials, I guess, but who actually can make a difference, and where we say, we take you out of your company, out of your NGO, out of your government function. We give them, through the Masters of Tri-Sector Collaboration, the grounding in what it is to work together. And we actually say, and go and work in another country, in another type of industry or sector than you're used to, and get that experience. That's what we try to do beyond what's happening in this room and on this campus, where we actually do invest a lot in trying to groom future leaders and change makers.
Yeah, but I think we have to have a caveat here, and that is that we should be humble about the role of universities, the role of elites, and we are not here to create leaders. If you really look around at Southeast Asia and you look at civil society groups, the leadership is already rising out of civil society within Indonesia, the Philippines, Burma, and so on. It's not going to be SMU anointing future young leaders of Asia. No way. The only thing we can do is to help be a player in the development of young leadership in Asia. And even then, we have to have a humble view of our role. Because we are a university, we can probably provide a lot more academic framework to many of the young leaders who are already on the ground, mobilizing NGOs on a lot of the pressing issues which we up here in our ivory tower look at, but they do not have a lot of that academic framework. We can help with that. We can provide research and academic framework for many grassroots leaders. We can facilitate connections between young people and so on. So clearly we have an important role to play in the development of leaders, but we must never assume that we are going to pluck young people from Asia and then we're going to make the leaders out of them and send them back. That would be a very jaundiced view of the world and of the role of universities as being top-down institutions where leaders are created to then go and help others. Because as Martin would tell you, and I've seen when I travel around the region and all the rest of you, there is a lot going on in civil society, which is going on despite us and in spite of us. And we just need to tap them and see how can we help them, not how will we create leaders out there to help the rest of the world.
And I'll probably just add that at the end of the day, the tagline that we are using now is really by helping others just do good better. And with young people, it's the same thing. There's a lot that's happening already. And how can we as an institute, as a university, just help them just do it better in all our research and programs? We have time for just one last question. Yeah, Prof. Yep.
Hi, thank you. I'm Wee Kee Beng from ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute. First, I would like to thank the panelists for really very interesting session. And I do appreciate all the concepts that have been thrown out about political leadership, societal leadership, and to connect to what Mr. Ho said, social leadership, that should be distinct from societal leadership. But in all this, I get the sense that we are assuming secularism. We're talking about the secular world, really. But at the same time, we know in the world that religious leadership or religious social leadership trying to become societal leadership, trying to become political leadership is very much alive. It's one of the biggest divides. How do you communicate over that? That would be a big problem. I just wonder if the panelists would like to comment.
I don't think that we can, in a way, take away the influence of spirituality and religion in our world today. It's very much the human experience. And I said, I talked about principles and values. And a lot of it, I mean, there are ethical values that comes from the UN principles, and many values and principles that comes from different religions and so on. At the end of the day, I think if we are talking about social and building a more inclusive society and talking about social inclusion, I mean, one needs to actually look at the role of religion, of belonging, of identity, and how all these are actually being created. And I would say the use of faith leaders also as agents of change would be critical at this time, because there are other mobilizations that are taking place around that. And in a world where many people are losing their dignity or losing rights, and a world where discrimination is still absolutely real, many people actually turn to other ways of resolving their situation in life and finding solutions. And we have seen, I don't have to look at the type of violence which we see in our world today. And of course, they use religion as the legitimizing force and the use of religion as an authority to mobilize. And I think that we have to find the common ground and the good that many of our faiths have actually been able to kind of inspire. I just want to talk about the youth very, very quickly, Martin. And I just feel that we talk about governments, we talk about business, we talk about civil society, but we need to talk about communities, because in many cases, and many of the leadership actually comes in spontaneously to solutions, looking for solutions in everyday life, and also new problems that have emerged. I mean, a very good example recently was what happened with the crisis at sea. Governments couldn't respond, and we're talking about the Andaman crisis. Governments refused to respond. Business was caught in. Civil society was trying to basically move around. And at the end of the day, it was the communities of the most unlikely people, the young fishermen, the community leaders, citizens. So you don't have to wait to be leaders. I think the youth, I must say, don't see yourself as the leaders of tomorrow. See yourself as the leaders of today.
Absolutely.
Because you have issues that you can be engaged in.
Yeah. Arnold?
I want to have a quick comment on what you say. And you mentioned that we start from a secular perspective. I actually don't agree with that. I think that religion, spirituality, as you call it, ideology in some other cases they're human, they're so characteristic to human beings. That's what we are all about. Our beliefs, the visions that we have, at whatever. Coming from Europe, which notwithstanding all the conflicts that we see today and all the difficulties around migrants and whatever, is still a fairly homogeneous society, frankly speaking. The whole of Europe, Western and Central Europe. Coming from Europe to this part of the world has such a diversity, such a rich diversity in terms of backgrounds, religions, opinions, beliefs, visions, that it's actually a challenge to bring all people together, and one sees that in the political side or the economic side when we look at ASEAN, but it's actually one of the richest assets of this region of Southeast Asia compared to other regions or other countries which are much more homogeneous. And China is a lot more homogeneous in a sense than Southeast Asia. So I see this as a great advantage of this region if we can make something out of it, if we can build on each other. And so again, within the university, I have quietly stimulated a diversity and inclusion unit to say, let's make sure that this is a place where everybody feels comfortable, whatever your background in race, religion, ethnicity, gender, disabilities, whatever where you're different, but where we appreciate and value differences, and then talk about how do we do the inclusion. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge. That is, we see all these dividing elements. You talked about division, divisive societies. The word inclusion is one that we probably have to have as an ideal. How do we include everybody?
And if history is anything to go by, what divides us today can also be used to unite us in many of the things that we're talking about. I'm very excited because later on, Lai Ching is going to share from our research in terms of the oral history of the leaders that we have collected. And some of the things that we are talking about have appeared in some of these papers, and we're going to leave Lai Ching. I'm not going to steal her thunder for her to share some of these insights. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed at least a good start to the summit. Okay, very quickly for Mr. Umang Soting, yes.
You know, at the age of 83, I think I have the privilege of talking to.
Absolutely, sir, absolutely.
The last one, very short. I agree everything what you have discussed, what you have talked. The one thing I would like to emphasize this. How to pull down the Berlin Wall. We
Dividing
used to
walls.
build castle.
Yeah.
We used to build a wall.
Yeah.
Your idea, my idea, like that.
Yeah.
Because as I'm doing social works, NGO works for more than 12 years, I found many Berlin walls that I cannot crack. I try to associate together, and I propose consortium, government, donors,
Consortium, yep.
UN, international NGO, Myanmar NGO. Up to now, I am not successful. And someone said, Uncle, you may not successful because everybody is self-centered.
Yeah.
Everybody is, they don't want to lose their autonomy. They are quite safe in their own culture and the world. So I would like to know how to crack, how to pull down the Berlin Wall. Thank you.
We will give as a souvenir. I think that's a very well taken point, and I think what you should do, Martin, is that you let everybody take home a small sledgehammer as a souvenir so that everybody can go home and break down their own party walls.
I would actually add to that, we need more people like you who actually break down the walls.
Yep.
It needs societal leaders.
Exactly, and then I must say that was a model of leadership of the 20th century, where people acted out of interest, of their own interests, of the interests of their own group, and then they keep the other. So it's us and the other, and we were so good at that. But the leadership that is needed in the 21st century has to be with the broken walls. You're absolutely right.
So being a society leader will absolutely mean that you need to use a sledgehammer. And I'm glad that Umong Sotin has spoken up because he will be coming up in the next panel. That's a great advertisement. After that. So it's a great advertisement. Make sure you go for the session where he's actually sharing. At 83 years old, he has traveled all the way from Myanmar to be with us. I think we should give him a big round of applause for being so gracious to be with us. It has been a great partner to have. And at the same time, would you join me in giving a big round of applause for our panelists for our keynote panel today? Thank you very much. Sabrine.
Thank you all for a very engaging session. Could I invite you all to please take a group photo, just very quickly? I would like to introduce Dr. Lim Lai Cheng, Academic Director of ISL, and she'll be introducing societal leadership in Southeast Asia. Dr. Lim?
Pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming back after the break. You noticed that we overran, so in a way, I won't take very long with my section because we've got 3 heavyweights here on the next panel. And I'm sure they would have a lot to share because some of them have traveled from very far. What I've done the last year, whilst Martin and my other senior colleague Tony have been doing these young leaders training, is to focus on the applied research that ISL wanted to do. So I'm just going to be introducing to you 3 papers that we've made available from on our website, the last of which has actually been printed for you. So if you'd really like to take a copy, please do so at break time. Basically, what we've set out to do is to try and figure out what societal leadership can mean for those on the ground, rather than to come up with a theory to test it from where we are at the university end. So these are the 3 papers that I'll just quickly introduce. For those of you who are more academic inclined and you want to look at a serious paper provided on our website. But the first paper really sets out to understand societal leadership, more from the impact that leaders have created on the ground, as well as the strategies that they've used to create that social impact. So the paper is actually based on conversations with over 200 social impact organizations that we've met when we travel each of the Southeast Asian countries, each Southeast Asian country, and the interviews that we've had, a more serious sort of sit-down interview that we've had with 80 senior societal leaders, social catalysts, and social innovators. We've realized a few things. One is that societal leaders can come from any sector. It can be an individual, it can be a business, it can be a government division or unit, it can be an organization that is set up for that purpose. The approach that they have for those who've made impact and for those of whom we've been very impressed with, the approach is really for the people and by the people. It's never from a self-generated agenda that is self-centered. The attitude is also one with a long-term commitment to the place that they've set up with the aim of equipping locals to be their own societal leaders in time to come. And the focus we found for each of them is a specific social issue in a community that's targeted at the most vulnerable within that community, but to leverage other social benefits that might be useful for that community. And the engagement we've also observed is very much characterized by harnessing existing support systems, incentivizing partners to provide better services, and to take responsibility for particular issues. So some of these have been very successful working with governments, such as government divisions within a certain district or village, some with businesses that have got a strong social sense of responsibility. The next, so that paper is available if you want to really look into the examples that we've cited and the people who've been doing good in the region, the social innovators and catalysts. I'd just like to quickly move on to the second piece of research, and this is my favorite because we've spent the last year doing 31 interviews with very senior societal leaders. And what we wanted, as Martin said, is to collect their story of leadership challenges, leadership moments, traits that they admired in the people they've worked with, who I'm sure were leaders in their eyes, and then traits that we've found coming from their own stories that really distinguished them as special people and people with a very strong sense of purpose. These are the interviews that we've completed, you know, the likes of President Fidel Ramos, our own Mr. S.R. Nathan. We've got social activists. We have got people in the business sector. A lot of the Indonesians are business tycoons with very strong work ethic, business ethics. We have former Prime Minister Chuan Lik Pai of Thailand, Malaysian counterparts. We've got 2 social activists also from Cambodia, Timor-Leste, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Jose Ramos Horta. Every country was covered just for this first year, and we were going to be doing a lot more. So what we've tried to do is using NVivo, which is a qualitative research software, work through each of the transcripts, and I've picked the first 20 that we did. So out of the first 20, I went through the transcripts to do the coding on some of the traits that came through that is common amongst the leaders. So I'm just going to show you 4 of the top clusters of traits that were common amongst the 20 that we've analyzed. The first is the sense of single-mindedness and drive that we found. 101 mentions across 20 interviews. What do we mean by single-mindedness and drive? We broke it down to things like persistence and fortitude, traits like the ability to inspire and lead, a decisiveness and a firmness when they make decisions, and the courage of conviction to drive through and to finish what they've set out to do. So I've got some of these examples in the paper just to back up what we picked out. The second cluster or traits cluster would be the strategic mindset. They were adept at strategy. You can't have a great vision and no strategy or no sort of wherewithal to see it through. So we found that these leaders had very practical mindsets, and they took the long view. They weren't there for the short haul. They had a longer plan in mind, and they were very grounded. They were where the people were. So if you look at someone like President Fidel Ramos working with the soldiers in the South, he made sure that there was a plan to provide an alternative livelihood for them so that the dignity is kept up. They weren't there to just ask them to surrender their arms, for a peace treaty. We also had Mr. Saranathan telling us that the founding leaders were those who listened, and they were also always one step ahead of the rest. The third traits cluster that we've picked out, 66 mentions across 20 interviews, values-driven and being principled. What do we mean by that? A strong sense of justice, putting the country before self, and strong work ethic. We have someone like Kartini Mujadi, who is a judge, a woman judge in Indonesia, saying that they've experienced a lot of acts of injustice in their day. And so when they had the chance to make a difference, they just want to make sure they can secure justice for their own people, especially in countries which were trying to build their nation, countries which had been, of course, colonized, and countries which had actually been run by people who were natives. The last one, which I'll just point out, is humble disposition. We found that, of course, humility can mean a lot of things in different countries, in different social contexts, Western, Eastern. But it encompasses things like being modest in behavior, the ability to see things in perspective, being very open-minded to hear different views. Some of them, of course, had humble starts to their life, right? They lived in situations where they were the oppressed, they had colonizers, they felt that, they weren't really owning their own land. But more importantly, they were open to understanding what people want. Remember, Arnold talked about listening? Yeah, so this is it. Listening and knowing what people want and not working against the aspirations and the longings of the people. And there's some of these. Kokogi was, for our Myanmar colleagues here, he was in prison for a long stretch of his life. But he persisted. He felt that it was a sacrifice worth it because it didn't mean a sacrifice for his own family. It was for him an investment in the future of the country, speaking up for carrying on with the activist work that he was doing. Okay, so these are the 4 key clusters. We understand, of course, that these have to work within the context. There is a cultural philosophy, there is a religious sort of moral principle that each of them would have kept to because of the country they were in and the time they were in. These people also were very sensitive to social norms and the aspirations of the people. So this paper is available if you want to really go more into detail. The last bit that Martin has been alluding to is we've completed reports on each of the Southeast Asian countries. And we have got one each on our website if you want to look at it. But the compilation is available for you, and we've printed it out as a monograph. A compilation of the insights from each of the countries in terms of giving you a sense of the landscape of the country and the key challenges of each. But overall, we pull out common insights, which we hope will be picked up by a lot of our panelists later to elaborate as well as to validate for us in the days, in the hours ahead and for tomorrow. The challenges that the civil society organizations have told us that they faced. One is politicization. I mean, they could be set up to serve the community, but because of the politics and the government, they could be seen as not on the government side, and that is when they get into trouble because the government would then create their own NGO and have people support the government-backed ones instead. They also come up with a lot of bureaucracy because of government administration in some of the countries that require them to fill in a lot of forms and pay a lot of money for experts to help them fill in the forms before they are endorsed as an organization. And of course, a lot of them try and play in between that tenuous relationship with the government. Some of them would rather not be on the radar of the government in case they get exploited to pay more taxes or to create sort of alternative channels for the funds that come in. Key constraints that they face, especially in the area of funding, included some of these. In small countries like Brunei, for instance, you find that they're tapping the same source of donors. I mean, how many corporates are there and how many international organizations are there to fund, certain charities? So they rely on the same things like charity drives, golf, and all that, but, they find that the pool is drying up. Also, with the financial crisis that we've experienced in the last decade or so, they found that the funds are also drying up from people who would directly pay to support a cause. We have got some experts here who will, at the forums, the panels later on, tell us about the newer waves of impact investors as well as venture philanthropists and what they're asking for, rather than have people donate directly to causes with no accountability or no return on investment expectations. The constraints face also reliance on patronage, especially in a place like Malaysia. Reputational risk due to politics, as I've mentioned, especially for NGOs that are closely associated with political leaders. And when these leaders get into trouble, the whole sort of community of NGOs get black-marked as well. And some NGOs find there are limits to impacts because of government constraints and restrictions. So they can only work on little areas, especially in Cambodia where there's so many NGOs. You find that they can't aggregate for greater impact. They can only deal with the little areas they are given the space to function in. As I think Ho Kwon Ping mentioned earlier on too, the rise of social entrepreneurs. We are seeing a rise of people, young people especially, who are very interested to go into the social business and not just setting up NGOs. In some places, these are seen to be more acceptable than NGOs because they're not challenging governments. They're seen as businesses, and they're seen as more in the science and tech area, and so it's not posed as a constraint to government sort of efforts or government efforts at assuring people that everything is in control. We see also a population that is more keen on supporting local products, and I think GK will be able to back this up, that there are more people willing to pay more for products that are associated with social enterprise. What they need, they tell us, still alternative revenue streams, because you can't do a social sort of concern without a strong business model, and that has always been a tussle for social entrepreneurs. They do ask if they could get more training in managerial skills, business skills, and they see the language competency as a barrier when they want to try and pass on the skills to the locals. So this is a quick summary, and the last slide I would say here is there is a call for more cross-sector collaboration, stronger government administration, and less bureaucracy, better public education so that you've got more people who are skilled to provide and to contribute to that work in the community, better infrastructure, especially for transportation of goods, and a banking sector that supports what people are trying to do in the region, stronger application of innovation, and possibly mentorship of social sector leaders. And I think some of our panelists are going to be talking about that, the work that they're doing with NGOs. So this is the cover of the monograph that you can pick up on your way out. Thank you very much. I'm going to invite our panelists up here, and they're going to be sharing with us a lot more of the work that they do. Tony Maloto, please, from the Philippines, Mr. Tony Maloto. Mr. Don Lam, who's just joined us from Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, and Mr. Tham Sai Choi, who is based in Singapore. And I'll do a quick intro when they're seated. I know they're all a little anxious after that session that set the standard for a discussion and a panel, so they will be fine because they are heavyweights in their own right. Mr. Tony Maloto is founder of Gawat Kalinga. It's one of the best known, if not the best known NGO in the Philippines. His work in the slum area started in 1995 with a youth program focused on building sustainable homes in remote rural communities. He has a vision to end poverty for 5 million Filipino families by the year 2024. Mr. Don Lam is CEO and a founding partner of Vina Capital, an investment firm which offers a range of corporate finance and real estate advisory services. Vina Capital Foundation is the social impact arm that is created to fund developmental and humanitarian projects in Vietnam and the region. And the foundation's vision is a Vietnam where all children, regardless of health complications or a lack of access to education, may take advantage of the opportunities of the foundation and live full lives. Mr. Tham Sai Choi is Managing Partner of KPMG Singapore and Regional Chairman of KPMG Asia Pacific. He is an active member of Singapore Society, being on several government advisory panels such as the National Productivity Council. He is heavily invested personally in championing social responsibility and promoting a sense of community and purpose amongst the staff and KPMG country officers in the region. What I'm going to be asking them to do is to take about 10 or 15 minutes to just share a little bit on the focus of this panel. And the focus really is the forces that drive societal leaders in Southeast Asia and the context that those who want to create impact have to be aware of and to be able to navigate through. So this is really from experience on the ground. So they'll have about 10, 15 minutes to do that. As a start, because he's furthest from me, Mr. Tony Maloto will begin. I know he has a video he wants to show. Shall we do it now?
Good morning. I just wanted societal leaders to speak about their engagement with us because we're talking about solidarity. Okay. So I guess instead of talking about what I'm doing, but I think it's really listening to people, how they experienced us.
Do you want
Can
to
we
play
show
the
the video now?
Yes, so let's play the video now.
The first phase of our journey is for us to heal a broken nation. As we ended the first phase of Gawad Kalinga about social justice by providing land for the landless and homes for the homeless, showing Filipinos that we can end poverty in our country if we care for one another and if share with our bayanihan spirit, what our gifts and talents for all of us to rise together as a people. Through Kalinga and Bayanihan, we were able to build over 2,000 communities and really transform the lives of almost 1 million people. The second exciting phase that we call now social artistry.
Sa pagtahak po natin sa tuwid na landas, bibigyan lakas po natin ang lahat, lalo na ang mga nangangailangan. Ang paglulunsad ng Gawad Kalinga Center for Social Innovation Social Enterprise Movement ang magbubuklod sa mga pribado at pampublikong sektor upang maglatag ng mga makabuluhang programa at napapanahong inobasyon sa pamumuhunan sa bansa.
The Enchanted Farm in Angat, Bulacan is the first of 25 sites that we are developing all over the country. Areas where we have a Gawad Kalinga community and we have at least 10 hectares of land. The Enchanted Farm connects the students of the top universities with the community. And this is where we see it, first of all, as a village university for social education. It is a village university for the rising Filipino, where rich and poor learn to be partners in development. But it is also an incubator for social business, where we are able to attract business and management students with expertise in technology and with interest also in tapping the creativity of the poor, for us to be able to really create wealth that will benefit those at the bottom of the pyramids.
I mean, you would get the best employees you'll be looking for. They are 100% committed, they're 100% reliable, and well, we've been growing pretty fast. At first, that was just a livelihood program, so when we started, we were just involving about 3 mothers. We were doing a bit over 1,000 pieces. Then eventually, we started turning into a business. We were able to do, in 2013, sold more than 35,000 stuffed toys. We have 20 mothers that are on a regular basis, so we grow more than 2 million sales now. And our target for 2015 is to double it again, so reach 5 million and provide 50 jobs. So it's not really about the numbers, it's not really about the financial statement, it's a lot about the relationship you build with them others. I trust them with my life now.
I'm building that kind of bridge, creating opportunities not only for myself but for others, not only for Filipinos but also for French who come here.
GK truly embodies everything that positive psychology studies. What enables individuals, communities, and whole institutions to thrive and flourish. If you care about enhancing the human condition in a holistic, sustainable, egalitarian way, there is no better model than Gawat Kalinga.
So I was here to discover the model, and then 3 months after that I actually quit my job and actually paused my PhD studies for 1 year. And I want to help the social entrepreneurs innovate to really be game changers for the poor. I believe that social entrepreneurship can be a worldwide solution to poverty.
GK has been identified as the most trusted organization in the Philippines.
So now we are working with corporations to go beyond CSR, but to go for CSI, corporate social investment.
We all share the same passion and objective of helping make this a better country, a better world. And that's what we see here in the Enchanted Farm. What has been done here by Gawat Kalinga is an experiment which demonstrates that we can actually make all these things come together, and when we make them come together, that the poor can actually become very capable and can rise beyond poverty.
Hari Foundation counts almost 8 years in active partnership with GK, having witnessed the tried and tested fruits of the GK way in nation building, which is definitely in sync with the Hyundai way of moving the world together. And here in the Philippines, we call it Bayanihan. It is the Philippine concept of solidarity in action and moving the world together.
The purpose of our business is not to maximize profit. We say that it is to optimize profit. Just make enough profit so that the company will be able to grow, but put a lot of that back into Gawad Kalinga and other poor communities. And it's only when business starts to really love this country that we will see a radical change and really a coming out of poverty of millions of our people.
It has become simply a new season of hope. And Gawad Kalinga went through its own transition to this exciting phase of social entrepreneurship, social tourism, social innovation. We're simply seeing that Filipinos now are starting to really discover that the Filipinos themselves are the solution to our own poverty. The next generation will see a Philippines that will be squatter-free, a country that will have no more slums, great abundance in the countryside, finally be able to live in a country where there is prosperity and peace because of the faith and the love of our people for God, country, and for one another.
It's been a long journey for us. From the bottom, going to the top university, Ateneo, and my president from the top Jesuit school is here. But for many poor people like me who have the education as their way out of poverty, they forget where they come from. Because it has always been urban-centric. Send the brightest from the rural areas to the city and they never come back to the communities where they come from. So it's the loss of our human capital and the abandonment of our land. And the Philippines being so rich in natural abundance, has no excuse to be poor. And our poverty is a scandal to the world, with 12 million hectares of fertile land and highly creative, talented people. But I guess our poverty is a case of disconnection, of exclusion, and marginalization. And so I realized when I had that privilege and going through my multinational track, and also because I got a pedigree from the top university, I was able to marry a wife with pedigree. So it's all part of the success formula, that you always match compassion with competence. So we're now building this whole business of kindness, that doing good makes good business sense. But it is, again, attracting the outliers from the top universities in the urban areas to go to the rural areas. And so it's a platform to really work for social inclusion and for us to really build an economy from the bottom up and to match those at the top, because the most educated also come from the most privileged, but it's always seeing the poor as objects of charity, not as our greatest wealth, not as our greatest, as our market. So now we've worked with over 700 major corporations, as you have heard from the president of Nestle, the head of Shell, the head of Hyundai, that they invest in us because bringing the poor out of poverty is actually creating new markets. And also starting to really empower the poor together with the competence of those coming from the top universities in the Philippines and abroad can actually tap the genius of the poor, because they have resilience, they have creativity, they know how a duck quacks, which a lot of those from the city do not know that there's a mallard, there's a Peking, and there is a Muscovy. They just are consumers. They just eat what's presented in the top restaurants. But the French have discovered the Philippines now as their gateway to Asia. And so we're able to attract the brightest and the best from HEC, from ESSEC, from Polytechnique, and also the top people from Singapore. So in the second phase of GK, after building 2,500 communities, we are now building farm village universities as our business centers in the rural areas. But our goal is to bring the bright rich, the most educated rich, to come to the rural areas where it is safe. And we're happy that last week, the Enchanted Farm was the only venue of APEC outside of Manila. Because when you talk about poverty and you talk about ending conflict because of poverty, it's difficult to just stay in a five-star hotel where they're not included in the conversation. So I guess I was happy to see in the Facebook of the Prime Minister of Singapore that the students from Singapore and from APEC shared that the best part of their trip to the Philippines was their visit to the Enchanted Farm. So our farm was designed by the students of Singapore and built by the engineers and the entrepreneurs of France. So now we are building this template and replicating it in 24 other provinces. And now we also would like to bring in our partners from Indonesia so that we can do the same thing. We are now in partnership with Jakarta to help rebuild the lives of 20,000 of their informal settlers. And we're now working with Malaysia. So instead of fighting over territory in Sabah, we would like to work together to end poverty in Sabah. So I guess this is just the start of our journey, and I'm happy that Lawrence here is starting also to build his network, and I was listening to some of the brightest people here, but I think what we have to learn from this is the power of presence, because we talk above the heads of the people we want to help, and I guess we have to overcome our fear. We have to create platforms of solidarity where the threats have become our protection. It was just funny when the APEC leaders came to the farm that we don't have a security guard, we don't have guns in the farm, and we used to have rebels, former rebels and drug dealers and criminals live in our community. But the APEC leaders, there were only 160, they had 340 soldiers guarding them with sniff dogs. So I guess this is the world that we have built. We are scared of one another. And so it is important for us to realize that we can turn our liabilities into asset, our waste into wealth, and our threats into protection. So this is just the part of the journey, and I'm 65 years old now. I hope that we can celebrate in 2025 together with the Singaporeans who've helped us. But we'd like to invite SMU because Arnold and Martin have been there. But we would like you to send some of your students like you used to do, because social entrepreneurship now is a new world of business. And I'd like to show you that our social enterprise is the fastest rising cosmetic company now in the Philippines. So because this is the trend, to develop supply chains, to develop the entire value chain. We ask other corporations abroad, what are you sourcing your ingredients from our country? Because more and more of our people in the future will not drink coffee unless it is produced in the Philippines, will not eat chocolate unless it helps our farmers. How about the processing? Are you processing to create more jobs in our country? How about your profit? You know, are you sharing your profit to really end poverty in our country and to also expand your market base? So these are just practical questions we ask. We have to match our lofty idealism with enlightened pragmatism. So I hope that you can join us in our journey. We have a Social Business Summit, January 15, 16, 17. We hope that this is the last way that we can honor our president, because he has done so much to really restore the integrity in our country and attract also the respect of the global community. But after he's gone, then we're just praying that we get also a president who is just as honest as he is. But I guess heart of what we're doing is really integrity to gain global credibility. Thank you.
Well done. It's really inspiring, Tony. The investor, Mr. Don Lam.
Well, you know, before I started the Vienna Capital Foundation about 8 years ago, I have no clue about civil society, charity work, or any of this stuff. So sitting here today, I'm so inspired and listening to Tony and everybody else of all the work that they've done. So, I mean, this is, I'm humbled by all this because I'm just an investor. I'm not really... just a little background. Like I said, we're currently the largest investment company in private equity firm in Vietnam. So we manage about $1.5 billion or so. But before 8 years ago, it was all accidental. I tell you, I have no clue. I have no interest in doing any of the work or putting back to society. Zero. All I care about is how to make return for my investor and make the most money possible. One of my friends asked me to join him on one of these conferences. So I thought it would be great for Vienna Capital. I go there and, you know, maybe I can see and donate some money to it or something. But at that conference, I met a mother who just lost her 8-year-old daughter because of heart disease. And so we saw a conversation. It's a simple start, nothing special. But at that time, I have 2 girls, a 6 years old and a 3 years old. And the mother started the conversation saying, well, you know, I just lost my girl who's 8 years old because of this congenital heart disease that we have in Vietnam that nobody knows about. And this disease is very, very cruel because when you have this disease, if you don't recover or you don't have money to do a surgery, the child actually dies slowly over time. So essentially, your heart pump starts to squeeze until you have no more breath, and so you die. The kids actually die slowly in front of you over, say, 2 or 3 year period. So if you have an accident, so you get over it, and you know you get sad and then it's move on. But here, you know that you see your child is dying, and nothing you can do for it. And I asked her, you know, what does this cost? And I found out that the surgery is only about $3,000 to $5,000 per surgery. And I say, wow, I've been managing all this money and all this stuff, and I couldn't help this one kid. So that's how we all started. It's very simple, nothing to it. I never thought about it, but I came across this woman in one conference, which I thought was great for Vienna Capital and how I can, you know, just polish my brand, really, for corporate CSR. But because of that one thing that happened, we started the Vienna Capital Foundation at that time, and I invited one of my partner, Robin Uston, who run another organization to make sure we run it professionally. And from that, today, we save over 4,600 kids with funding for the heart surgery, so we saved their lives, and we saw many other programs, but that's how it all started. It's very accidental. It was not intentional, but I feel that after it was done, it was great because I feel that finally there was a purpose, something you can do, you can help, it made you feel good about it. And the thing about Vietnam, maybe some other country around the region as well, is that there's no concept of helping other general people that you don't know. The concept of helping is mainly through families. So, you know, if you get into trouble, you call your family. So your family help each other. Or you would donate something to your village. So it's very micro context. It's nothing really societal. It's nothing that you can actually say, well, I don't know that person, but I'll help him anyway. We don't have that. Perhaps maybe because Vietnam is just emerging, so it's new. But I'm hoping that as we evolve, Vienna Capital is now trying to not just to fund program, but we're encouraging our investee company or our partner to join in. So we are trying to publicize the good deeds that you should be involved, and you should be helping other people who cannot help themselves. So that's what we are very proud of. So that's where we are today, with the All Foundation being probably the largest privately run foundation in Vietnam, funding a number of different programs. I don't want to go all of it, but the other thing that I want to talk about very, very briefly is that about a year and a half ago, we started something called the Lotus Impact Fund. The Lotus Impact Fund 1 is closed now, so we work on a Lotus Impact Fund 2, which is a $25 million fund. But what it is very simple. We have a fantastic skill set in private equity investment. We have a great foundation that we run and helping people. So we combine those two skill sets and start the Lotus Impact Fund, which is really an impact investment in a short form. So we're investing in social enterprise and so on and so forth. But I can go into more detail on that later.
Well done. Good job, Don. Okay, and now for the auditor. The auditor with a heart.
Thanks, Lai Ching. Taking up the mic is a bit of good news, bad news. It's, I noticed that every 15 minutes the bar has been raising. So I'm kind of quite, well, I suppose it's bad news that I'm taking on the mic when the bar has been raised so high. It's, I suppose, good news that I'm not doing this afternoon. I had a very, very enriching time this morning listening to everyone. And I just wanted to share some thoughts with you about some of the things that I've heard and how it relates to some of the things I've been thinking about. So I've spent all my working life in business, almost all of it in KPMG. So I'll talk in terms of those experiences. And basically, I've got 3 points to make. The first one is, and Anu did refer to that point, business leaders have a role and need to do more. The second point, which again, Anu preempted me, Asia is different. I'll share some thoughts about why, having spent most of my working life, not all of it, in Asia, why that Asia might be different. And the third point, that between government, civil society, and business leaders, actually business leaders need a lot of encouragement because of certain factors that we see around us to actually do more, and it's actually not so straightforward. And if there's some time, we should share some of the things that have meant a lot to me in terms of what we've been doing in KPMG. So the first point, that that business has a role. You know, when I do my work every day, it's just so amazing to realize how big business is. So my firm is in 160 countries, 160,000 people. And I don't regard it as a very big firm because what we do, and in terms of my experience, it's not just from this firm. We serve more than half of all the business organizations in the world. Walmart is big. Walmart has a turnover of $400 billion. That's bigger than Thailand or Malaysia or Singapore. It's GDP. ExxonMobil is 300 plus billion, even at current oil prices. Walmart employs 2 million people. Honhai, that makes your iPhones, employs over 1 million. These are really big organizations, and we're talking about one organization at a time. And my point is, if we look at what we need to do with change on the issues of the day, the resources are with business, not with government, not with civil society. 2,000 years ago, the resources were with the king, and that was the state. Over the last 2,000 years, at certain stages, organized religion came in, and in some places had some command of those resources and can and could put change through. But today in the 21st century, if you look right across the world, the wealth that's been created in the last 300 years has been created in trade and business, and that's where the resources are. And I don't just mean money. I mean people. I mean innovation. I mean ideas, and so on. So business has to be part of the solution. You talk about, I don't know, if you think about the richest business person in the world, well, there are lots of contenders there. But think about Bill Gates. We all use his products. And then he found himself on a personal fortune of $80 billion. That's power. He understood that. He took 28 billion of that and set up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's in the same American tradition that sees Harvard having an endowment fund of $36 billion. And that might not mean anything to you. The rest of the top 10 universities have somewhere between 10 to 20 billion of endowment in them. Just another number. But I tell you what this number means. It means that a university like Harvard and the rest of the Ivy Leagues and top universities will never ever have to charge student fees to pay all the things that it needs to pay. That's a lot of money. Where did it come from? It came from business. It came from the wealth that was created by business and contributed to those universities. So that was my first point. Business has a role. The second point that was raised, which kind of surprised Anu when he first came to Asia, why is Asia different? So why is Asia different? Why don't we have universities that can afford to never ever have to charge its students any fees ever again? Is it because we don't have billionaires? No, we do. Is it because our people don't give? Well, we do. But it is different. And Bill Gates and Warren Buffett is another US billionaire, well, they set off with a campaign to get billionaires, and this focusing on billionaires. So they didn't come to ask me to pledge money. They asked all the billionaires they knew in the US to pledge that half of their wealth will be given away in their lifetime. The giving pledge. They got, I think, like 60 billionaires to pledge. They came to China, and they realized it's a bit different. And they realized they had to understand something that was different about Asia. And I think, from all my observations, and I don't know a lot of these billionaires, I know some of them. They employ me, and I have to work for them. In Asia, if you think, of course, there are many parts of Asia, and in many ways, Asia is not a true continent that's been forged out of multiple wars over the centuries. And we've been very blessed in that sense. But if you think about what defines Asia, Confucian philosophy, Hindu philosophy, both of them very, very big on what family means and how it fits into the social construct. You think about the Hindu idea of a joint family and extended family and how it takes care of the disabled, how it takes care of the distribution of wealth within the extended family. And these are all the same kinds of issues that we are talking about when we talk about societal issues. It offers a solution of its own. You think about Confucianism and about filial piety and about respect for elders and about the family being the starting point of the building blocks for society, and escalating all the way to respect for the state and the king and so on, and authority. So somewhere in here, a family needs to be in the equation. And we see that, we've seen studies in philanthropy where we talk about the giving pledge. And that there are many philanthropists around Asia. Philippines, the Henry Su family with around the SM interests, say in Thailand, the Nin Charavanon and the Sharon Popan interests. We are sitting here in the Mokhtar Radi Auditorium and the Riyadi family, right? And around everything they've done around education. In Singapore, the Lian Foundation, and Lian Yingchao did in his time, probably did give half of his fortune away back to the community. So we do have some differences here. But one of my big bugbears is in Asia, we copy a lot of the models from elsewhere and forget what we do have. We do have in Japan the best ideas around lifelong employment, about how you care for society and how you distribute the wealth that is generated by very, very big corporations, very, very successful corporations. And that came from really in the post-war period as they found this wealth and they thought about how to distribute it. And I don't see that different from some of the successful businesses around Asia and what they've been trying to do. But when we impose some of the things that are taught really in Harvard and Yale and so on about what corporations do and how they look after shareholder interests, and that virtually to the exclusion of everything else, and how the company needs to be fit, business needs to be fit, fighting fit, lean to survive recessions and so on, by removing the least productive workers and leaving them to fend for themselves. And it works in some places where government and civil society picks up the slack. It doesn't work in most of Asia, where you do not have government that has the same command of resources, that has the same tax base to pay for those safety nets, and you do not have civil society that has the programs that these billionaires can put their money to. So that gets me to my third point. What do we need to do about it? And the third point is business needs encouragement, because they have been told by everyone around them, they just go and maximize returns for shareholders. And whether it's about putting money towards societal causes, or lending their energies, or lending their status and position, they've been told to focus on creating wealth for the shareholder, to the exclusion of everything else. And I think this is the kind of forum where we need to have a debate on exactly that question.
Thank you very much. Those were really provocative statements, Sai Chua. I'm going to allow now for the floor and anyone who'd like to engage our panelists in a conversation on some of the things mentioned. So we've got a gentleman there. Good to just let us know where you're from.
So I'm Sơn from the Lin Center in Vietnam.
The Lin Center. Vietnam.
Because we talk about because the first panel we talk about the three components in the government, business, and civil society. So I'm feeling that I work in environment that the civil society is to be sensitive and discriminate by the other two is business and the government. We are lucky that we have the Vinay Capital Foundation, and it's the rare business to do with the society or collaborate even to the society. So my question is it a challenge, and is too big a challenge for civil society leader or civil society people? Can we change the challenge to be opportunity or not? And what we do, because we feel that sometimes it's difficult to encourage the government or the business to dialogue or to participate with us.
Maybe take it from a business perspective. That's a good question, because I think based on what Mr. Tam also said earlier, is a lot of business in Asia is not really involved. And again, I just want to say that I was involved is accidental because it came across an incident that touched me and I was involved. But in general, a lot of the business is just not involved at all. And perhaps that's because there's not enough societal pressure, perhaps. Maybe there's not enough education or communication across that, business should do more. I don't know, but I think he's right because at the moment, especially in Vietnam, we do a lot of work in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar as well, but business simply are not involved in this area at all. Is there something we can do to get business involved?
Tony, yes. You have your government involved too, so do share.
We work with over 1,000 mayors, governors. We work with the president, the vice president, the cabinet. First is that I should not desire power for myself, so I am not a threat to politicians. So if I am detached from power, I gain the trust of the most powerful people. And if I'm detached from money, I gain the trust of the wealthiest businessmen. So you have to create a solidarity platform. But I'm using also my education in business school and also my corporate experience to create a brand that is sexy. It has to be attractive. So if you get the top business schools in the Philippines partnering with business schools abroad, you also gain the brightest as well as the children of the most influential people. Because to me, first is gain credibility for your NGO or for your civil society group, and also gain the trust of the most influential people. Now the thing here is that when you have to talk to big business or to politicians, you have to show it's a numbers game. So it's about the number of consumers you can influence and the number of voters you can influence. So because I'm a branding and marketing person, you go for co-branding with major corporations, with universities. That's why I work with my business school, Ateneo, with their competitor, LaSalle, so that you create. It's your partnership with universities that make you credible and sustainable. Because after, Procter & Gamble was started and Ateneo was started together with, at the time of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is dead, but Ateneo and Procter & Gamble are still around. So you really create sustainable brands. No? And the other thing for me is that I consider the poor as family. And we have, Mr. Don Lam and Mr. Tam Sai Choi here talked about family. But the problem, because in my country, it's the Chinese who are the most successful. I think it's the same thing also in Indonesia, in Malaysia, because they have an ecosystem within the family. And so most of my team are Chinese because they know how to make money. Filipinos know how to spend it. But then we have, that's why we're happy. But then you have to have the right combination. So the thing here is that we realize that an ecosystem is important. So if the poor are your family, you will not abandon them. You will invest in them. They will not just be objects of your charity because they're always suffering from abandonment, from being marginalized, from being used and abused. So if you treat them as family, so in the morning I'm with the poor, in the afternoon I'm with the rich because the rich are also family. At night I'm with my wife. So I have a very peaceful world.
Remember what I said about being adept at strategy? You're saying that, yeah? And also that work ethic and that single-mindedness about it. So this is a societal leader. Sai Choi, you want to comment?
Yeah. All businesses work towards a very focused business strategy, business objectives, implementation plans, and so on. And I think that the trick to get any kind of response is to find ways to align what you would be doing with what the business needs to do. So I'll give you an example. So in terms of my organization, and the point was actually made earlier as well, how do we best engage in the community and help to enrich the community? The easiest thing to do would be for us to set aside a budget of $20 million, call it CSR, take it away from our advertising budget and just have another form of advertising budget there. But we don't print money, unlike Don here, right? So it's not for us to give. What we sell is man hours. That's what we are. We are a professional services firm. We sell knowledge, we sell ideas, we sell man hours. So what we do and everything in this area is about getting our people and their time and their personal time involved in community causes. And that could be totally different from how you deal with somebody else that has a different business. So it's easier for me to get 2,000 people engaged in something than to get $200,000 check written out. It's easier. So what would those 2,000 people do? So we had a program recently, which is somebody came to us and asked for donation, very little money, like what Don said, to build a hospital in Cambodia. And when that check is the easiest thing to write. But what I want to do is, we do work for Parkway Shenton. We do work for Raffles Medical Group. These are some of the biggest hospitals we do for the government hospitals. What does it take for our people, right down every level of the organization, to go and look through the excess inventories that these hospitals have? And how that can be redeployed to this thing in Cambodia. It's actually very hard. We talk about some of that. The ministry needs to be involved. You cannot just pass this thing around. You know, you're supposed to destroy the excess stock. Some of them are nearing expiry date and so on. So there are a lot of issues. But it's about how we bring that particular need down to the objectives of organization. The objective I had there was getting people, which is my stock in trade, to be very engaged. Some of them want to be very engaged, not just in the professional work that they do, but some of the community causes that they identify with. And the people who had a chance to go and engage and find a solution, no extra money on the part of anyone. And we didn't want to go to Parkway and Raffles and ask them for money or donations either. We only wanted the bits that would cost nobody anything, because that's the way we do business solutions, not by spending more money, but looking for better ways to do things.
Great answer. Can we have some more questions from the floor? Olivier, and we'll take both questions, and then they have a choice, which they prefer to respond to immediately.
Thank you, Lai Ching. I just want to draw a direct line to Sai Choi's wonderful comments about business and the resources, and also Tony's own adept strategy and execution in civil society. If we look at Asia, I think governments have, the last 50 years, for good reason, optimized their approach around GDP, economic growth, and control. So I just want to pose a question on this third leg, which is governments may not have all the resources, but they do control many of the gateways and the restrictions in the space. Love to hear your views on this, and maybe Tony, you have more real-life experience.
So that's one question. Would you like to pose yours at the same time, so they have a bit of time to think about the earlier question?
Thank you. My name is Tony Morales. I'm the ambassador of the Philippines to Singapore. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm an admirer of Mr. Miloto, with whom I share the same first name. Thank you to all the speakers for the thought-provoking and inspiring presentations. My question is directed at Mr. Miloto. I was talking to him today, and he said our leaders, our president in particular, has only a 6-year non-extendable term, and he cannot run for re-election. So he said it's important for institutions to be there because they outlast the political leaders. My question is pertaining to the accountability of government. Fortunately or unfortunately, Mr. Miloto is not into politics, so he does not pose a threat to the politicians. But one of the issues that are always coming up is accountability of government. I don't know if Gawad Kalinga is involved in ensuring government accountability. If not, I think it's a big loss. If so, what is it doing to ensure that government officials at all levels remain accountable, and is good governance or the promotion of good governance part of your bigger agenda? Because as the President has stated in the past, that there is a link between corruption and poverty. So may I have your views on this matter?
Thank you, Your Excellency. So
think,
both questions are about government.
Yes, I realize that we've always focused on corruption in government, but we never thought about corruption in the private sector. And so if we want, for me, I cannot change government, I cannot impose anything on our government officials, but I can change myself. So I focus on being a good citizen and always showing our government leaders that we can build together, not to be an attacker of government, because there are very essential groups to keeping our government honest. So instead of, our philosophy is a build philosophy. What can we build together? So I'm a great admirer of the President. He launched his candidacy 6 years ago on my birthday at the Gawad Kalinga site, and he's ending his term next year. But in 6 years, I've never asked for any favors from the government, never accepted pork barrel funds, simply because we feel that the private sector, the civil society and business should complement what government is doing. I've engaged thousands of mayors, governors, congressmen, and I was told many of them are corrupt. Maybe they are, because we are a compromised society. But even if a person is 90% corrupt, I can engage the 10% honest. No, as long as I remain honest myself, and in all of this time, no one has ever offered anything immoral or unethical to me or to my organization. So again, let's just do the simple things that we can do, but also use what you learn in SMU or in Ateneo, you know, in terms of competencies, in terms of marketing and branding. I think we are branding also nation building, because there has been no articulation of a Filipino dream. And this is what we have articulated, but creating always a win-win situation for government. So if mayors provide land for the landless, then we will bring in resources from business, from volunteers, from the private sector, from universities. We'll get the poor themselves, train them to provide sweat equity. So we create a win-win situation with government. We do the same thing with business. We contribute to industrial peace. When Unilever Selecta had labor problems, they built a Gawad Kalinga village. They involved 100% of their labor force for 1 year. And after 1 year, they had the most peaceful labor negotiation. And in 2008, they came up with a full-page ad saying that we are the #1 ice cream because of Gawad Kalinga. We did the same thing for Hanjin. We did the same thing for Keppel in their shipyards. So again, it's being, it's complementing what business is doing. You have to really create win-win situation for the rich, for the poor, for business, as well as for their consumers and also for their personnel. And I guess we are doing the same thing with France. I just wrote an article about what happened in Paris, which we get about 300 interns from France every year. So the thing here is we're creating also a win-win relationship, alliance with France. They came to the Philippines with their knowledge, with their technology. We're opening a new market for them. They're winning friends, and the students we receive are the best ambassadors of the country. So we're creating also a space here in Asia where the French can actually help us develop our industries in chocolate, in coconut, because we find it ironic that we, together with Malaysia and Indonesia, the Philippines, we are the best places to grow cacao and chocolates, but it's just, to me, just scandalous that we export 85% of our chocolate from countries in Europe that do not even grow a single chocolate tree. And so now that the resources in Africa are drying up because the trees are 70 years old, I encourage the French and the Europeans, come to the Philippines, come to Malaysia, come to Indonesia. We will be planting chocolate trees or coffee. We will do essential oil. There is just so much that, and I'm just inviting the students of SMU, please come to the Philippines because we have all the land that you do not have. And we have all... And we have all the industries, and we have 100 million population. That's market and human resource.
Wonderful answer. First question on regulation and space, government.
Yeah, I'm not really qualified to talk about government other than for the taxes I pay, I suppose. But some of the points I made about business needing to do more, I think government also needs to do more, and governments are actually in the job of listening, and we talked about listening earlier. the question reminded me of a situation involving government recently, and let me share this, and it's a bit sensitive because it actually took place in a certain ASEAN country I know very well, which is civil society picked up this issue about very old people who make a living collecting cardboard boxes. And quite rightly, a very responsive government picked it up and went like, in this very prosperous society, we shouldn't have rely on these very oldest people to make a living out of collecting cardboard boxes. The minister in charge of that ministry got his briefing from his civil servants, and in response to a journalist follow-up, said exactly in accordance with the facts that were provided, it is not the case that every one of them does it for economic reasons. Some of them do it as that is their chance to exercise. But this was exactly the feedback that was coming from the ground. And that is my point about listening, about getting down to root causes. Because if you ask these people, some of them would be extremely embarrassed about being abandoned by their children in a Confucian society that gives the parents the respect through the respect that their children give them, their self-respect, through the children's respect for them. They are not going to own up to being abandoned by their children or spending time in a small, cooped-up apartment with the daughter-in-law, quite uncomfortable, and so on and so forth. So there is room to actually get down to root causes and listen better. Not about, again, spending more money, but simply about understanding the situation better and not just taking things on the surface. And that'll be my point about the biggest thing, looking at it from outside government, what a government can do better.
Don, what about space in Vietnam? Where the government can provide more space, even if they can't provide the resources to help civil society.
Vietnam has just opened up quite recently, and being a socialist country similar to China, NGO or any kind of societal work that we do is very, very sensitive, especially if you're a registered foreign NGO. In fact, we are a registered U.S. Foreign NGO. So the government don't necessarily give you the full support in what you do, but we were surprised that they don't interfere either. So in a sense, and a lot of the stuff that we do, we tend to do about half of it anyway with the government. For example, a lot of the medical training or equipment we do with some of the children's hospital, we do it jointly with the local government authority. So in that sense, they do support us and give us the space. But if you do something in Vietnam, for example, without informing them, then you are overstepping your space, and that's when you're going to get a lot of bureaucratic issue that may slow you down. So in Vietnam, like emerging country, we saw you do work in Cambodia and Myanmar is much more complicated.
I mean, we are talking about context, and you can see each of the countries would have a different context and a different set of challenges, even though the solution might be fairly similar and ideal. Can we have maybe one last round of about 3 questions? Anyone?
While we're waiting, can I just touch on a little bit about one of the challenges we face is that as every year, I want you to give more back to society. But my shareholders, I have shareholder and bosses as well, they refuse, or at least trying to push back. We will say, well, can you cut certain percent of your profit every year, and I'd like to do more. We have other programs besides the heart surgery. We have the education training for minority girls and all these other stuff. So that's always a challenge for business, is how do you give more without the support of your shareholder or stakeholders? And so maybe this is something that you want to touch on your social enterprise and so on and so forth.
Well, first of all, treat the rich and poor as family to create to be a connector, to be an integrator, to cut also the barriers, because we can tap on the genius of the rich and the genius of the poor. I'm getting also the best of the West and the best of the East to bring out the best from the least. Very simple formula. Very simple formula. But make your children social entrepreneurs. So all my 4 children are social entrepreneurs. That's my daughter on the front page. We save on advertising by getting them to be our models. So, and my married children married also social entrepreneurs, one from England, one from America. So create a global platform. So for global partnership.
Strategy.
No, I'm talking strategy really. And so we get our lavender. My daughter is flying with me to Paris. She's visiting Grasse because we get our lavender and our essential oils from France, but France gets a lot also from us. So it's again a matter of really, creating wealth that does not leave the poor behind. Now, for our corporation, like Human Nature, we give back 30% of profit to the communities where we source so that we can expand supply chains. So we look at the entire value chain, but at the same time, we pay double the minimum wage to our people at the lowest, because we don't want to overcompensate shareholders and business owners and underpay our workers. So the other thing is we have a no firing policy for the poor, because we never fire our children. We invest in the best education. So we provide them the best training, give them just wages, but we don't fire them, but give them tough love. We don't fire them, they just quit. No, so but this is the thing. So this is the thing, because they also need to develop character. We need to really build competencies. But the problem with people who come from a scarcity environment on a survival world, they need also to be given also the standards, the discipline, etc. But as long as they know they're being treated as family. And so their health, the health benefits of our poorest worker is the same with the CEO. And my son-in-law from England gave up his Ferrari, his Porsche, his BMW, his chopper, and rides now a simple car, because he realized that he cannot build a big mansion and just go to the most expensive places while his workers are living as informal letters in slums. So again, it's really just raising a new generation of global citizens who will not go for lavish luxury and vulgar vanity while a lot of people in the world are suffering.
We've been talking a lot about family here, so I've children too. This is a Singapore family, so it's not as big as in some other countries, because we have government policy that stops it, right? So, when my children get into being independent, so I tell you what I think they should be, what I like them to be. I like them to be business people who create wealth not just in terms of financial, but wealth in terms of innovation, in terms of ideas, in terms of solutions, and so on. Business people, full-time business people, part-time social entrepreneurs. I think that's the partnership that needs to happen, virtually embedded into individuals as well.
We've got 2 questions, so perhaps you'd like to give us your question, and then I'll go on to the next one. Give them time to think about it.
Thank you very much, and just a very brief one, because you mentioned your stakeholders are giving you a hard time when you're trying to expand your social activities to some degree at their expense. Did you explicitly ask them? The reason why I'm asking is because I'm only aware of cases where companies have explicitly asked them and shareholders have agreed, and there are many of them, and I'm not aware actually of a case where stakeholders were explicitly asked whether, and very often we're talking about a very, very small share of the profits actually, especially with large companies, money was used to be for social causes, and stakeholders have explicitly said no. If that was the case with your stakeholders, do you have any intel on why they actually might have said no? Thank you.
Can you tell us where you're from?
Apologies. Germany and from the Asia Philanthropy Circle. Thank you.
Can we have your question as well?
Hi, I'm Romy from Halogen. My question is about the definition of social enterprises in your respective countries. So what is the criteria and benchmark to be called a social enterprise? And whether it's government or civil society, how do they ensure that they are truly social enterprises and not leveraging this snazzy name for specific private purposes? Thank you.
Okay, maybe I can just respond to that first. I think it's a combination of me perhaps being aggressively trying to get a bigger piece every year into the work that we do. And of course, at some point in time, the stakeholder will say, well, you can't just take half of my profit and give it to civil society. It's a challenge back and forth. But I should be fair that my stakeholders have been very generous so far. Although I own almost half the company, but the other partner have to agree to what I want to do. So it's always a challenge because I want to do more. I'm sorry? No, there's more. There's about 10. But anyway, so it's this kind of work, by the way, is very addictive because the more you give, the more satisfaction you get, and the more you want to give. But of course, you can always do that with your own stake, but you couldn't do it with your partner as well. So it's once you get into it, by the way, it's very addictive. That's one. And the other point is then we start trying to find solution. That's why I think this afternoon session you should attend, the impact investment and so on and so forth. So that's sort of our solution is that, okay, let's make sure that we have something sustainable, medium to long term. So we are starting to already invest in social enterprise. And to answer your question about social enterprise, what we're looking at is business we invest that have a very, very high social impact return. Financial return, of course, because you need to invest in a profit-making business. Otherwise, it wouldn't be sustainable. So our first business, for example, we invest in is a company called Koto, K-O-T-O. Basically, what they do is a big catering company that they only hire street kids or at-risk kids, orphanage or drug addict, and they will train them in the hospitality industry. And then after 2 or 3 years, they would put them back and place them in restaurant and 5-star hotel and so on and so forth. So we invest in this business because it's a growing business. They need money to do more catering. We introduced them to Starbucks in Vietnam so that they cater to Starbucks, the UN school, and so on and so forth. So they are profitable, and this is something that's very sustainable and have a high social impact helping street kids. So that's just one example, but we have done a lot more in Cambodia and Myanmar, something similar. But that is really what I believe is the future for us, is to make sure it's sustainable and longer term.
I have the same problem. I've got 100 partners in Singapore, and I see them every day. So it's their money I spend every day if I needed to write a check. So, and I'll tell you how I've been dealing with it. And it's basically about making sure that the help that the community gets is totally aligned with what the business does and its business objectives. So every week, I fly 2 people to a jungle school in Vietnam. It's an extremely expensive way to teach English to a group of 30 tribal people from the tribal children from the tribal people. It'd be a lot easier for me to write my own personal check, engage an English teacher in Vietnam, and just get the job done. But here I've got 100 people selected for future leadership. We do not even allow volunteers selected to go as an exclusive development program to spend a week in the jungle, and in Singapore we got no other jungle to send them to. So it's a novel experience for them. And none of my stakeholders complain because it is important that we have the right staff benefits, the right leadership development program for these 100 people. And that's why I keep coming back to this point. It mustn't cost more. And there are a lot of things we can do if it doesn't cost more. That's a question about what is a real social enterprise. Again, I'm a real sucker for punishment and must be really doing it the really hard way, because we decided also in the local community to do something about some of the things that we see. So we looked at the social enterprises we want to work with and decided essentially to set up our own. We went out there, we basically went out to hire 3 people. We set up our own profit center, making basically glass artware that we can use as tokens of appreciation in events like this. At the end, you give the guest of honor a token of appreciation. We all get that. I get a lot of them, and I just throw it away. I just don't know what to do with it. Selangor Pewter does very well out of it. I hope no shareholders here. But ultimately, it should be the token rather than the value. So that was the idea. And the easy thing to do, and the group of the CSR team did go off, and we don't actually have a CSR team, the self-appointed CSR team, and they came back, oh, this is the catalog, or these are the social enterprises who do whatever. And that just didn't sound like what we wanted to do. We went out to look the hard way for people who we could re-engage into a community, people who are spending time at home, whose basic financial needs can be met by writing out a $1,000 check every month, but it wouldn't solve the other problems about them engaging in society, about dignity and pride and doing something. So that's the alternative. We sort of just do it the hard way rather than rely on whoever calls themselves a social enterprise. And the learning that we have is amazing. So the first thing we needed to do was get them to learn an art skill of some sort. Don't go to an accountant for that. We go in to find the best in Singapore. And I tell you, the artists who don't get it, why do you send me these people? These people are not good. They're desecrating my art. You just cannot send me people like that and try to ask me to teach them. It's just as well that this group that we started with were actually hard of hearing, so they actually didn't hear that. Yeah, but we have a group, and it's all this group, all hard of hearing, so they can understand each other. They can build something. We can get them out of the home. We found a studio for them. We hired a studio on a long-term basis so that they could come out. And it's not just about the first problem, which is the financial needs because they can't find work, but about engaging in community, building their own community, coming out, taking the bus, finding your way, all of which are key to them finding maybe their next job and the next way to be part of a community. All of it hard work, but all of it easy work if you get it totally aligned with what our people want to do. And in this case, no additional money. What are we doing? We're just asking people to set up another profit center. We know how to do that. Go and hire people. They know how to do that. Do they want to do it? Our median age is 27. A lot of our young people are very, very keen on doing things like that. They come through universities like this and learn that they have responsibilities. So tapping on their energies that don't cost money, very, very doable, and many great things can be done out there.
Tony, did you want to respond?
Yes, because the question was about social enterprise. So we talk about social impact and sustainability. Okay? And so we can get for the nonprofit, we get grants and a lot of corporate CSR, etc. But you have to convert that also into something more sustainable because you cannot sustain development through charity. And the thing here is that it's about recovery of human capital, which is getting the bright rich to work with the bright poor in the slums or in the rural areas because we cannot change the country if we just expect the poor to come to us in our comfortable offices in the business centers. They will not come. They will only come as maids and as drivers. But we will never get them to think beyond being the low-income groups that they have been destined to. But if we bring the bright rich to the rural areas, to the slums, then we will be able to build also environment that restore human dignity. But the most important thing here is for us to be able, to look at the shareholders as stakeholders, and so it's important. If you start with your own children, because use them as your guinea pigs, because they have been brainwashed by the world to really, go in a certain path of wealth creation and wealth accumulation. But learning to build a culture of caring and sharing is the new world that we have to build. Otherwise, the world is not sustainable. So with over 1 million beneficiaries, they have become also benefactors because with typhoons like Typhoon Haiyan, we were the first to respond on the ground simply because our beneficiaries in our communities were the first volunteers. So you turn them also to become also a human resource base on the ground, because they're the first to approach the remote areas ahead of those coming from the city. So they come in their tricycles, they walk to the places. The other thing is that you create also a human resource base in the remote areas. They become producers, and eventually they become also their network of distributors of the products that you will create. So again, looking at this from a long-term macro perspective, and not just to simply look at the poor as micro. And also the most important thing for us is to see that the problem of poverty is a behavioral problem with an economic consequence. So most poverty interventions are just focused on victims. Most of the job is just on women and children. But the men are also the most discriminated in the world of development. But they are the criminals, they are the rebels. So if there are the problems, they should be part of the solution. Even domestic violence is because of the men. And so we would like to really have, equal gender balance in the field of development. Because what will happen to the world if 90% of the women are empowered and they have only 10% men to have as potential partners? No, it will become a very dysfunctional world. So these empowered women will have to lower their standards, because they might be bright, but they have to fall in love sometime. So anyway, I'm just simply, I want to really just match our lofty idealism with enlightened pragmatism. And I think this is what this whole summit is about. I'm so excited to meet so many of you, because I don't want this conversation to end. I want you to, first of all, come and see for yourself something that's happening in my country, the Philippines. And if we raise the bottom up, everything will go up.
We have a long lunch break for you to approach Mr. Tony Malotto. I know we've got one desperate question there. We will take that as the last question, shall we? Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Wen Jie, and I'm a student from Singapore Management University. So my question is that, I think we all understand the importance of engaging businesses and governments in communities, and I believe that all of us have the same vision. But what worries me is that there are different narratives on how to achieve that goal. So maybe my question will be of a more localized context, in the sense that in Singapore's context, the state's narrative in terms of providing social assistance and welfare is pretty extreme. And what worries me is that sometimes this provision of social services do not necessarily coincide with the needs of the urban poverty in Singapore, and also the VWO's resources in achieving these goals. So my question would be, do you have any tips on how to consolidate these different visions and these different narratives on achieving more equality? Yeah.
It is a Singapore-based question, so I presume Mr. Tham Soi Choi should try and approach it.
Well, the easy answer that I've been giving again and again is simply everybody needs to do more. But I think civil society could do more and be sharper with the asks of what exactly is being needed. And there was a point earlier about communication. There's a point earlier about the difficulty to communicate across these different groups. And I think ultimately there is the willingness is actually there ahead of the understanding of the issue. So I think I don't have a simple answer there. I mean, I pointed out a really egregious example of a misunderstanding of root causes. But for me to finish that, I mean, lots of people point to that as an example of things that are wrong, that particular example. I point to it as an example of what's going right, because I think we got to the root cause as a result of that continuing debate, a better understanding of that particular issue, and that there are multiple layers to the issue, and we just need to have more and more of this readiness to communicate, to understand, to get down to the next layer of root causes again and again. No better answer than that.
True. Any last words from our panelists before I end this session? Tony?
We go for value, and we go for win-win solutions. And we feel that we should start to build a world together where no one is an enemy, a victim, or a prey. You know, that we have to really build a global economy, you know, that does not leave anyone behind to remain poor or without dignity. And we can do it.
Just one comment, really, really short, is that a lot of us actually don't think about what we can contribute back to society. Like me, like I said before, 8 years ago, I don't have an inkling of what I want to do. But I think anyone here can actually contribute a lot if you could just take that one first step.
Yeah, you took it away from me, so I just want to say the same thing. I mean, this is, this is a really amazing event. For us all who are here, we are part of that movement that will get those same problems that we talked about, those same obstacles, those same hurdles removed. The rest of society actually looks to us. We're not going to be able to look to really anyone else. The interested parties are kind of all here, and this is where it starts.
You've been a wonderful audience. I didn't even have to ask any questions. And I just want you to join me in thanking our panelists for their insights, the provocations, the words of wisdom, and the heart. I have to disappoint Sai Choi because we do have tokens to give to them. So this is a time where we would like to officially thank them with some tokens. But it is SMU made, it is original, and it is the story of how a 15-year-old university tries to change at least the community we're in. Thank you very much. So this is one for each of you. Is it recycled paper, Mr. President?
Please don't throw it away. Thank you. Can we also take a group picture, please?
We'll do a quick picture, and then we will have lunch.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, it's 12:26 now, so it's time for lunch. But if you don't mind, can you just sit for some administrative announcements? Sorry, not yet. Okay, the president gets to go. Sorry. All right, we have arranged for lunch just outside the auditorium. We've also arranged for some lunchtime entertainment. We'll be screening 3 videos. One is a compilation of DNA interviews that Lai Ching mentioned earlier with 5 notable societal leaders, one of whom is Mokhtar Riyadi, of which this auditorium is named. Please, sir. We also have 2 Catalyst Asia documentaries featuring 2 of our speakers at today's summit. Journeying with the Hmong features the story of Eugene Wee's friendship with the people of the marginalized Hmong Hill tribe and how he tries to help them deal with issues of domestic violence, drug use, crime, and abuse through his organization, Radion International. We also have Women with Dignity, featuring Kelly McDonald, co-founder of Yangon Bakehouse, which aims to empower women in Myanmar with skills and a hope for a dignified livelihood. Now, if you would like to watch more of our DNA interviews and CA documentaries, please go to isl.smu.edu.sg/YouTube. And you can also keep up to date with ISL activities on Twitter and on Facebook. One more administrative announcement before I let you go for lunch. Our breakout sessions start at 2 p.m. So those who've signed up for skills and competencies, what are the capabilities required, please come back to this auditorium. For the academia, what can universities do to add value session, please proceed upstairs to the level 6 function room. And now you can enjoy your lunch. See you at 2 p.m.